So I've just been on a little road trip down the coast to Bateman's Bay for the weekend, and I thought while I was doing this, I might give a little rundown on what my touring setup is for my motorcycle presently. I've gone through a lot of different iterations of how I've toured on my motorcycle, and I'll throw up some other photos of what my previous touring setups were. But I've just kind of hit on what I think is a really nice little setup. I've recently made some additions. So the first one is the top box on the back of my motorcycle. This was all pretty cheap. It was a really cheap top box. It was about $30 that I bought off Gumtree, and then I welded together a little frame on the back here to hold it there. You can see I made a video about this, so check that out as well if you're interested. But in addition to that, I've also got some saddlebags which I've never used before, or I've used a very cheap pair a long time ago, and I've just recently upgraded to some nicer ones that I believe they're Ventura brand, and they're quite spacious. And the other thing that I've added is a swag, and so this isn't just a sleeping mattress swag, it's actually like a very small tent. But the benefits to this is that you can roll it up with your sleeping bag and sleeping mat inside. Most of these swags actually come with a foam mattress that comes in the bottom, but that adds a lot of bulk to the overall size. So I actually took that out and I just have an inflatable mattress in the bottom there. But the benefit to it is that it's really, really quick. You can just take it off the bike, roll it out, stick in the tent poles, and you're pretty much done. It means you don't have to screw around with putting in too many pegs or inflating your little mattress at the bottom and then packing it up again at the end of the day. So like the big problem with a tent I found was that you need to roll it up, and you need to set it up, and then you need to undo your sleeping bag and also the sleeping mattress and then set those up, which I found to be really time consuming. So I camped with it last night and it was actually really quick. In addition, I have this little tank bag which I use, which is just so that I can have a lot of quick access items that are in there that I can get to really easily without having to take apart my luggage. So those are the main things. The saddlebags are actually pretty full right now. There's a fair bit of stuff in them. And the way I've set up the swag on top is just with these handy straps. So they just go over the top, and it's been quite secure as I've been riding. The biggest thing I found with the top box, and a lot of people have said that this is a major downside to top boxes, is that if you put a lot of weight in them, the weight's up very high. And I've had this problem with previous touring setups, is that it makes the bike a bit unstable. So in this road trip, what I've done is I've put all of my lightweight items in the top box. So this is stuff like my clothes, my wet weather gear, which is also very light, and things like that. In the saddlebags, I'm putting on my cooking gear, like my camping stove, and as well as I think my tool roll. And so all these heavy items are much further down on the bike, giving it a lower center of gravity, which I found has actually helped quite a bit when I've been riding. So that's pretty much it as far. The other thing I've done though is I've added these handlebar risers to the handlebars, and this is because I found on long trips, when the handlebars are quite low, so for instance if you had clip-on handlebars, you're leaning over a lot, and that eventually gets pretty sore, pretty tiring on your back. So what I decided to do was get these handlebar risers, which are at about 5 centimeters of height to the handlebars. I got these off eBay for $20. They're quite cheap. So far, I tested them out just around my house to make sure that they were sturdy and that they didn't interfere with the handling of the bike too much, and they've actually worked pretty great. The angle at which I'm riding is much more upright, which is quite nice. So that's about it. I would definitely recommend getting one of these swags if you're touring, because even though it takes up a lot of space, just the quality of life of having them is a lot better. Alright, so that's it for now. So I thought I would do a little bit of a retrospective on the different touring setups that I've had in the past.
This setup you can see right here was my very first setup. It was when I took a trip down to the coast to stay with some relatives, and this setup was basically just a sleeping bag, my sleeping mat, and some clothes. At this point, I knew absolutely nothing about how to tour on a motorcycle, and I had found a um, gear sack. I'd actually gotten a gear sack from some family that I was using, and it didn't really fit on my gear rack. So overall, this was a pretty rough setup. I was pretty much just using Oki straps to tie everything down, other than the gear rack. And you can see in between the sleeping roll and the gear rack, there's this little black bag that is just basically a sort of regular, um, almost like duffel bag that I just wedged in there. It was pretty secure, but um, it really wasn't made for that. This is the next setup that I used. You can see the addition to this setup is the saddlebags on the side of the bike. These were some really cheap $50 saddlebags that I got off eBay, and they were pretty horrible. After one trip, they started to sort of, the seams were coming undone. But this was another step up, and you can see I still have the black bag that's Oki strapped onto the gear rack, which is completely not made for being used as a motorcycle bag. I was just ad hocing that onto the back of my bike for extra luggage space. Um, this setup was actually pretty good. I had a tent inside the. I had a tent with me as well as a sleeping bag, but I only used this for a 2 day trip, and I think for a longer trip it wouldn't have held up. This is the first really serious setup that I had. I used this for a 2 week trip down to the Great Ocean Road. The biggest addition to this setup is you can see I have I believe it's a dry rider bag that's on the back. Now this was a sort of a U-shaped bag that sat on the rear passenger seat of the motorcycle and overlapped down each side of the motorcycle, almost like saddlebags. And this gave me a lot of extra luggage space. Um, on the top there, Oki strapped down is still the same black bag that I was using on the previous two luggage setups. I just couldn't get rid of it, I suppose. Um, so this was actually a quite versatile setup. Even though space was still fairly tight, um, it wasn't bad at all, and I definitely found it quite useful for a longer trip. This was the setup which I used when I went to the Flinders Ranges in South Australia. And you can see that the only major addition to this particular setup was that I bought a cheap tank bag of Gumtree for like $20, which gave me a little bit of extra um, luggage room, and really helped out with having small items that I needed to get all the time without having to take apart my luggage. Um, Other than that, there isn't a whole lot different. This setup looks really insecure. Looking back at this now, I'm kind of amazed that I actually rode around on this. You can see the tank bag is way overpacked and being held on with a red strap that I bought from a hardware store, because I found the bag was leaning too far over the back of the bike. I'm kind of shocked that I was actually using this, but it got me there and back, so I guess it wasn't a problem. And now we're back to my latest touring setup, which I've already talked about, so there's no need to go over that. I hope this has helped you figure out some of the better ways to tour on a motorcycle, especially on a sports bike, and to solve some of your luggage problems if you have the problem of not having enough space on the bike. Thanks for watching.
Hey there, little guy.